these community centers that are being set up, what is all going on, it's part of a blueprint for this expansion, dominion, and in the sense, it's an incredible threat against the fabric of our constitutional republic.
Welcome back to the For Liberty and Justice podcast, where we seek to mobilize the church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and justice. I'm Joshua Moore here as your host today, and we are getting ready to talk about an enormous issue, that one that is pressing on Texas, that's hurting the Lone Star State, and it's just a very massive issue that has recently popped up, but it really has been in the making for a long time, many, many years. And that is, if you're probably concerned about it already, is the Muslim compound, as I like to call it, epic city that is being attempted to be created, established, and they want to build homes, businesses, all sorts of things in the name of freedom and liberty, which we already have in this country, in our state. So with us today, though, to talk about this is Dr. Mark Fulmer. Thank you, Mark, for being with us. We are excited to have Mark here because he is a doctor. He also has expertise in geopolitical happenings and just broadly speaking across the world and what that looks like. And so we want to bring you on to talk about what this looks like. And we're going to go into some questions, some topics regarding this issue. Why is this a concern? Why are they doing this in Texas? And what does this look like both culturally, legally, and spiritually? So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of give us a rundown, and we can sort of back and forth a little bit about what this is. What is this project? What are they trying to do? Why don't you lead off with us on that?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Thanks. Because, this project that's going on really 40 miles outside of Dallas and the unincorporated areas, Collin and Hunt counties, this community center. People think, oh, what's the problem here? Maybe you can have a religious community center. No problem at all. Well, to really look at this, at ground zero, this is actually what I would call, you have to understand the implications of Sharia law. Which really governs the jurisprudence for these Muslim communities. The problem is that you get into their view of Sharia law being into these communities, practiced by these communities as such, and they see themselves as actually operating above the law, within their own confines. An organization called Act for America by Bridget Gabrielle, who monitors what we call Sharia law incidents in the United States, has said in the past decade there have been over 142 situations where liberal court judges have favored Sharia law over against the Constitution of the United States. Well, and here's the thing about it. These community centers that are being set up, what is all going on, it's part of a blueprint for this expansion, dominion, and in the sense, everything, it's an incredible threat against the fabric of our constitutional republic.
Yes.
And it's a very dangerous one, actually.
Actually, Mark, to that point, there's a lot to get into here, but I wanted to bring up the constitutional portion of this because this is very, very important. Article 6 of the Constitution specifically states, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land." Full stop. Now, it goes on a little bit to talk about judges and judgeships, so on and so forth. But the point of Article 6 is to lay out part of it, is to lay out the fact that no state law or municipal law can supersede federal law or the Constitution, any law based on the Constitution, because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So when we're looking at this city, this epic city, that's basically, as I understand it, it sounds like they're wanting to go under Sharia law. That's the intent, right? And so with that in mind, they obviously can't violate the Constitution, which is why Governor Greg Abbott has come forward and put investigations in place. By the way, those investigations include the Texas Rangers, the Texas Workforce Commission, the Texas State Securities Board, the Texas Funeral Service Commission, and Attorney General of Texas. Those are some big entities. That's a problem. And not for, obviously, for Governor Abbott. I mean, this is a clear-cut issue, but it's an issue because I think what people might be thinking, people who may be a little bit more moderate on this issue, Mark, they're probably thinking to themselves, look, we're an inclusive nation or state where we believe in liberty. We're tolerant of other religions, right? So what's the problem here? What's the problem, Dr. Fulmer?
Yeah, well, here's the thing about it. People understand, okay, that Sharia law within the basis of these Islamic community centers, what goes on behind there? First of all, they have an exclusion policy for these community centers. Non-Muslims are not allowed entry. The other thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
The extreme Sharia applications of their law call for really barbaric treatment and punishment of offenders, which a lot of people don't realize that. And countries around the world where Muslim communities dominate, or they dominate nations, the Sharia law goes to the extreme of these barbaric punishments, everything from amputation, beatings, floggings, and honor killings. What are honor killings? Honor killings basically justify the patriarchal leadership of the family to kill their own sons or daughters.
Whoa.
If they violate their honor, if they violate what they feel the Quran. And we've had in the past 10 years multiple honor killings that we've had to deal with. Recently in Irving, a few years ago, outside of the Houston area, where individuals, they executed their family members. They executed their daughters or son-in-laws for things like converting to Christianity. Okay, if you want to look at the whole package of this, Josh, try to understand what's happening in nations around the world that are governed by Sharia law.
Yes, that's such a great point. In fact, it's kind of interesting you bring it up because at the National Day of Prayer recently, we had Kevin Sorbo came in to speak, conservative and Christian in Hollywood. And it was so interesting because he was talking about a story, as you were well aware, that a young lady came to him and said that due to his movies, like God's Not Dead, she was saved. She accepted Jesus Christ into her heart as her Lord and Savior. She said, according to Mr. Sorbo, she said, I live in Arizona or Nevada, one of the two states, somewhere out west. And she said, I lived there, but I'm from the Middle East. I had to flee because my father tried to kill me.
Absolutely. And here's the thing about it, Josh. That testimony was amazing. My wife and I are working with an Iranian couple who escaped from Iran out of the Islamic regime that was ruling that state in Iran. If you become a Christian, if you decide to follow a Christ, a death sentence is placed upon your life. And this couple we're working with had to escape from the country. Oh, by the way, Iran, when we talk about Iran is the result of a disastrous foreign policy process implemented by the Democratic Carter administration, who deposed the Shah of Iran, used the CIA, took out a legitimate government, and put in place an Islamic State regime. And so here's the amazing thing about it. Where there's tyranny and oppression, Islamic State exist. People don't realize that. But here, we have to realize, we have to wake up. We have to get the wake-up call to realize, oh, wait a minute.
Right.
Let's look at the geopolitical context. What's happening in the nations around the world?
Absolutely. And so with that, let's take just a real quick step back, because I think people still might want to know as well the importance behind what this community is. And real quick, I'm just going to read off their vision statement, which says that, welcome to Epic City, which is, of course, the name of the city they're trying to build. Where we are committed to building a vibrant, multi-generational, and inclusive master planned community. Our vision is rooted in creating a safe and purpose-built environment that fosters growth, connection, and prosperity for all who call Epic City home. Our vision is deeply rooted in the belief that every individual deserves a safe and purpose-built environment in which to thrive. We have meticulously designed Epic City to be more than just a residential area. It's a thriving ecosystem that cultivates growth, fosters meaningful connections, and paves the way for prosperity for all who choose to call Epic City their home. That's a lot of fluff for in an interesting way of saying, we're going to build a community that's based on Sharia law. And I think that is the intention and point. You don't see Muslims come together in a community to build a city, right, or a community without the intention of there being Sharia law placed on them. And I think that's just the illegal and constitutional side. They can't do that. But what's concerning, Mark, is the fact that they're trying to do it in the first place. And this isn't in New York City. This isn't in California. This is not in New Jersey or some state that is pretty much predominantly run by socialist leftists who hate our country.
Yes.
This is done in Texas, albeit one of the more left-leaning counties and city areas, but nevertheless, it's in Texas. And I think that's what's concerning to people, is they go, what is this Muslim community trying to build here, and why are they doing it, and why are they so brazen about it in the state of Texas? Because the other side of this also is the fact that they've been kind of getting away with it. And I also look at this and go, you've got the governor raining down on you, but it took everything to expose this. And there's just a lot of concerns, because there's a spiritual aspect to this as well. Sharia law is a law. Even though it's a religious law, it's a religious law that also they form their civil code based on that law. And so the distinction I want to make here real quick is the fact that here in America, right, Mark, we have our civil law is based on, well, at least it used to be, and largely based on biblical law or Judeo-Christian principles. And that isn't a bad thing. That's the way the founding fathers had designed our country. We've had many shows on this on our podcast before. So people might say, well, you always talk about how you guys want your civil law to be based on Christianity. So what's the problem with Muslims doing it in their community? The problem is our Constitution, just as John Adams said, was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And that moral and religious people was distinctly Christianity, not Muslim rule of law. Christianity opened the door for tolerance. We tolerate other religions. We say we have this general code we operate by, and as long as you don't hurt anybody and do this and that, you're okay. Muslims don't see it that way, though. Right, Mark?
Absolutely.
And so carry on with that as a segue. Yeah. Muslims don't see it that way with their law.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important. Our founders based all the principles of our Constitution, everything that became the fabric of our great republic, upon the Judeo-Christian values. Now, principles, biblical principles.
Right.
Now, let's look at Sharia. Where did it come from? The Prophet Muhammad, in early 6th century, conceptualized the idea of Sharia that would govern Muslim communities, Muslim nation states, and he had this grand vision. So it was based upon, out of the Quran, and the Quran in chapter 9, verse 29. Here's what it says. It says that we will make war upon all of those who do not believe in Allah we will declare war. In other words, they use this term. It comes from the Arabic, jihad. It means strife, resistance. And so built within their code. So we're looking, Josh, at an ideological, a theological construct that's built in that says if you are not a Muslim and you do not convert, okay, then you're an infidel. Jihad is proclaimed back in the 6th century, the Prophet Muhammad, and has for centuries against non-Muslims, especially two groups that have been in the crosshairs of the target. Number one, Christians. Secondly, Jews. Why is this movement? You're seeing this outrage with radicalized students on university campuses, burning Israeli flags, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-terrorist. And, these are the same groups that are involved with that very ideology, that same construct. So here's the problem. When you get into that, compare that with the Judeo-Christian biblical worldview. Compare that with the basis of this ideology. It is a false religion. The followers are deceived, and we have to pray for them. But they are following devoutly. Devout Muslims they operate under this principle with Sharia, jihad, and we don't understand all that. We remember, again, back to George Bush said right after 9/11 that this is a religion of peace. I'm sorry. History and their own scriptures prove otherwise, Josh.
And Mark, that's a fantastic segue to a part of history in our nation that people are largely unaware of. Islam and Islam attacking our nation is not a new thing. 9/11 is now over 20 years behind us, though we're still feeling the effects because people were really hurt by that. We lost about 3,000 people that day. I remember I was 12, and I remember distinctly that day when it happened. I was watching it on the news and everything. But Islam attacking our nation and waging war on our liberties and our freedom and our way of life, our culture, is not a new thing. This goes even as far back as the 18th century, or if you have to do the math, the 1700s, right? We were dealing with this decades leading up to the war for independence for our nation. And then we had the Tripoli pirates that were attacking our ships, which, by the way, fun fact for people, that's where we got our United States Navy. We had to develop a Navy in order to push back on the Barbary pirates and the Marines as well. We had to push back on the Barbary pirates because they were just attacking American ships, merchant ships like crazy. We couldn't even make any money. Our commerce couldn't move forward. We were scared and terrified to even move forward with that. So you had people like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, which was in large part also one of the constraints they had on one another was foreign trade and how they were going to go forward with it. John Adams was a little more passive about it, and Jefferson, interestingly enough, libertarians love to use Jefferson as this sort of poster boy and pacifist. I love Jefferson. I'm a big fan of Jefferson. He was not. He's the one that actually sent them in and said, we're going to go crush the Muslim pirates. We're going to wreck them because we got to get our country in order and back on track to earn some money and pay off the debt, which Jefferson believed was immoral. But that's a slight rabbit trail there. But getting back on track, you have the Barbary pirates that are attacking the ships. Mark, this was like 250 years ago. This is 2.5 centuries. We've been dealing with this problem for a long, long time. And so you fast forward, now you have this great state of Texas. There's this city that's in the progress of trying to be built. Thank God that Governor Abbott stepped in and put this investigation in place. Now you have multiple entities looking into different aspects of this plan, trying to figure out this is not legal, this is not constitutional. But it's not even just a legal thing. Mark, we have to understand, why isn't this a legal thing? Besides the fact that our Constitution, which is very important, by the way, besides the fact that our Constitution precludes a state or city law from being put forward that is in violation of the supreme law of the land, there's also the spiritual aspect. And we can't ignore that because our founding fathers understood that when they created this nation and designed our country, they wanted our posterity to succeed and thrive, right? And that's what we're trying to do. And it's going to be hard to do that. when you have a religion that is in opposition with the one religion that founded this country, that being Christianity, and this religion being Islam, wants to not only put their rule of law in place, if they take over, which, by the way, I don't think they are. I'm not going to use fear tactics. I think that they will fail at this because we're stepping up and we're exposing evil. But they're trying to push back on us. And so when we're looking at the spiritual side of this, how does this affect us Texans right now? And what can we do to begin to push back on that?
Absolutely. What we have to do, we have to look at this big picture, especially that's happening, Josh, in geopolitical events. If we want to look at a lesson for a street not to travel down on, it's to look at the European nations who have, for the past several decades, they went this route of being inclusive, intolerant, accepting. And shortly after 9/11, what had happened? They saw an uptick in Islamic communities in London, in Paris, in Frankfurt. But the progressives, as always, as they do around the world, as they do here in the United States, they've always pushed for, let's be an inclusive and tolerant of these individuals. We don't want to profile them. So these Islamic communities began springing up. In London, it was so bad that the police, the authorities, they called them ghettos. They called them Muslim ghettos. And they were fearful for their life. Could it go in because there was so much violent crime that was going on. And then in the past decade now, we have seen some of the deadliest terrorist attacks occur. The London subway bombings back in 2006 claimed hundreds of lives. In Paris, France, at a concert hall, over 200 died from terrorist attacks. And these were all perpetrated by radicalized Islamic extremists that were part of these communities, okay? And the thing about it, if we are looking at, if we as the United States continue to go through the path, and also our great state, the Lone Star State of Texas, we continue to go down this path, okay, we're going to be tolerant, we're going to kind of wink and shut an eye to what's going on in these communities, then we're going to pay the price for it. And Josh, you mentioned about what happened in 9/11 with the terrorist attacks. This is something that's been happening. This is a war that's been going on for over 200 years. They want the annihilation of the United States, death to Israel.
And why do they want the annihilation of the United States? I mean, I believe it's because we are the superpower of the world, and we stand in the way of their expansion as a religion and a force. Their nations together, like the Middle East. Am I correct on that? What has been your experience and what you see going on?
Absolutely. It's on the top of the list. It's this one thing, Josh. It's our Judeo-Christian biblical worldview. They hate that.
Yeah.
They despise that. For that reason, they've called the United States, they've condemned us as being the great Satan, the adversary. So that's why they shout the radicalized protest groups on campuses shout death to Israel, but also the United States. They burn the United States flags. It's a war of ideology. So back to our motto, it's not political, it's spiritual. There's a spiritual war that's also going on, more than the ideological or the political.
True. No, Mark, I think this is such an important point to bring up because oftentimes when people talk about law, and I read this in a lot of books too, where constitutional scholars, they'll use this fancy language and they'll talk about the rule of law and the Constitution and its interpretation. And they'll say things like, well, it's not to be founded on any particular law, and people want to go to natural rights and natural law, and it's this document that has its text, and it doesn't really fit anybody's particular ideology. It's a very beautiful document that's inclusive, and that's not what the Constitution in fact is. It's inclusive in as much as it allows us to choose a government that is of the people, by the people, for the people. But its fundamental principles are actually very biblically based. And so the reason I bring that up is you were just talking about, a war of ideologies, a war in the spirit realm.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what this comes down to. The founding fathers, when they built this nation, they built a nation based on the idea in practice, by the way, not just an idea.
Yes.
People say the American idea. No, America is actually people with commerce and homes and human beings and souls that live in it. So we constitute what America is, just like the body of Christ constitutes the bride of Christ, right? And so we look at that, we move forward, and it's a beautiful thing, but at the same time, we're being opposed by this spiritual force. And by the way, it's not just Islam, it's other religions too that are at war with Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Holy Spirit. And the difference between us and them, and I say them as in those who espouse this religious view, are that, or I should say is that we don't war against people. Just like Scripture tells us, we war against the spirits and the principalities, not against flesh and blood. That doesn't mean we don't operate in self-defense as individuals and as a nation, but we do war against principalities and spirits. And that's first and foremost what prayer is for, to push against that. But we also have to have a nation that pushes up against the fruit or the manifestation of that ideology, and that is humans that I align with this religion called Islam, that then read the text and go, we're going to wage war on the infidel, death to America, death to Israel, death to anybody who doesn't worship Allah, and believe in Muhammad's word. And we go, no, because Muhammad's a false prophet. And so people that are viewing this right now might go, okay, I kind of heard about that. I understand that a little bit. But how does this relate again to this city in Texas? Mark, this relates to what we were talking about at the front end of the episode, and that is there's this city that's being attempted to be built, and just because Governor Abbott has temporarily stopped it and hopefully stops it permanently, that's not the only thing that's happening. If they're brazen enough to build in North Texas, Mark, where else are they building? I just got report from someone near Austin. They said there's a mosque and they're already meeting together in large groups talking about doing something similar near Austin.
Yeah.
That doesn't shock me. But this is probably happening all over the country. And that is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I asked you earlier. How do we combat this? And you addressed it. We're talking about how to push up against this. Well, first, I think it's prayer.
Yeah.
But also, what has been your experience and what have you learned from other people? Because you have connections within the FBI and whatnot, people who are addressing this. What are they seeing happening across the country, especially after 9/11?
Absolutely. And one of the things about this, Josh, is that after 9/11, where we knew. It's like we knew who the enemy was. It slammed into the World Trade Towers.
Yeah.
And basically, it went basically the Pentagon, and we knew the perpetrators. We were investigating the Muslim Brotherhood and the Holy Land Foundation right here in Dallas because there were alleged links that they had to funding these terrorist groups because these organizations, Josh, these networks receive millions of dollars from terrorist hotbed nations. And that day, when I was working shortly after 9/11, I was working with the FBI, CIA, Department of Homeland Security. We had the largest, what we call fusion centers in North Texas. They were intelligence gathering centers where we would work with local law enforcement. And we knew, to watch for the Islamic radicalized threat and to basically monitor that for the safety and well-being of our citizens. So what happened? With that, we began seeing a shift in the FBI, in the CIA, Department of Homeland Security, suddenly saying, look, we can no longer profile these groups because that's racial, that's bias, that's hate speech. And suddenly, I myself and one a good friend of mine, an FBI agent, we were working with the Special Investigations Department. We were being sent the sensitivity training, Josh, and slapped on our hand. Oh, shame on you for these groups. And we began, what is going on here? But we began at that time, Josh, began giving in to the lie, that we need to be tolerant, we need to be inclusive, and rather than watching on terrorist watch, these people will be on terrorist watch list. The group that I just mentioned to you, Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the Holy Land Foundation, that had direct ties, are also linked to funding these communities. Now, Muslim Brotherhood and Holy Land Foundation have been outlawed in 15 nations as terrorists, including Syria and Russia, but not the United States. Why is that? It's an incredible thing. And here we have a huge conference early in 2025 with the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic Nationals of North America, met in a conference. And they have a 15-year plan to build thousands of community centers all around the United States, Islamic community centers, train up 50,000 attorneys who are experts in Sharia law, and to implement action networks to elect Muslims into key positions in federal and state government. So not only that, but the plan also involved building nonprofits on major university campuses. Josh, this is a well-orchestrated plan that has been laid out for 15 years. We need to get back to building up our security back to the common sense values that we had prior to 9/11 and say, look, we need to be these groups, they're on terrorist watch lists in 15 nations. Why aren't they on terrorist watch groups here? And so it's the same reasoning behind the radical progressive left, the lit-in MS-13 convicted killers, not a problem at all. We'll send Democrats down to Venezuela and visit them in prison and plead for their release back to the United States. These are the same groups, the leftists, progressives, that are seeking to destroy our country. And they're no problem. They let millions, by the way, Josh, came across our borders in the last decade from terrorist Islamic hotbed nations.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I was in a Homeland Security conference, and there were statistics back even then that were talking about how radical Islamic extremists loved to penetrate our southern border and to come in and basically build terror cell networks. Well, you can imagine what's now. Now, 20 years later, after disastrous Biden administration has allowed thousands of these terrorists to come across the border, you can imagine now West building, these communities are being built where these terrorists, we call it back in the Department of Homeland Security, we call them sleeper cells.
Yeah, correct.
They would infiltrate, build a community, hide behind the radar, and then at the right moment, carry out planned attacks. And we need to be so serious, again, Josh, implementing laws where we vet these groups, put them on the terrorist watch list, and begin sensible protecting our own people once again.
Mark, that's great. Thank you for that information. We really appreciate you coming on. Folks, look, here's the deal. You might be thinking to yourself, well, usually you guys talk about law, and so I can contact my state rep, my state senator, whatever it may be. That's not something you're going to necessarily have to reach out for them. They can't really do a whole lot right now. This community is under investigation. This group is under investigation for their actions. You could reach out to your representative or your elected official and ask them to keep their eye on this for sure. But here's what you can do. You need to get involved in organizations that are fighting for liberty and justice. Not just our organization, but other organizations out there. There are many of them. Find an organization that you can plug into and that you can engage the community with. Whether that's teaching, whether that's learning, you could even door knock for candidates, donate to them. But here's the deal. We've got to put down the remote control in the living room. We've got to put aside some of our conveniences and some of our luxuries that we have enjoyed for a long time. And we have to put that aside for a moment and sacrifice a little bit. I know that's a word that people don't like to hear today, particularly conservatives. No, I don't sacrifice anything. I want to live my life free from government and so on and so forth. You have a community and a duty. This is a word that the founding fathers used to use, a duty to your community to help them. That's what you have, a duty as a citizen to not only vote correctly, vote for the right people in public office, but also to get out and door knock, to educate, back in the day, we used to call it letter to the editor. Now it would be a letter on X, Twitter or Facebook, whatever it may be. Get out there and begin exposing these evils that are occurring in your communities. That's what you're called to do. At the bare minimum, that's what you're called to do, especially if you believe in the Word of God. That's what we want you to do. We want you to be obedient to the Word of God. We want you to expose evil, to steward the responsibilities and assignments that have been placed on you. And by the way, some of these assignments come from the nature of you just living in this country. You are blessed to live in the greatest country on the planet, the greatest country that has ever existed in human history. So now it's your chance to defend it. So do that. This is your call to action, to step up to the plate and begin getting involved in the organizations that are putting up the fight and resisting tyranny and ushering in justice, a biblical justice that serves the common good for our state, our nation, and our communities. We'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the For Liberty and Justice podcast, where we seek to mobilize the church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and justice in the governmental realm. Hey, look, we'd love for you to follow us on all of our social media at For Liberty and Justice. Subscribe to the podcast, share it with a friend. And if you're looking to get involved, we'd love for you to either launch a chapter or join a chapter in your local area so we can keep fighting for liberty and justice together. You can do that by going to forlibertyandjustice.us and signing up today. Let's keep fighting to mobilize the church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and justice together.